I know I'm a few months late to the party since the first NASCAR In-Season Tournament wrapped up back in July, but I wondered if creating a 1v1 bracket style format like that for other seasons would have given us the same chaotic results we saw this year, where Ty Gibbs defeated Ty Dillon in the championship race. So, just for fun, I'm going to do this for the 2009 season, using the same rules they used this year. Why 2009? No reason, other than that was the last season I uploaded on my other channel, so we'll get to see some nice high definition footage when reviewing the races. And if this is interesting to people, we can make stuff up for even more seasons. Before we can set up our bracket, we need to figure out which races to include in the seeding and tournament itself. Unfortunately, we can't just mimic what they used this year due to schedule and TV network changes. Now, this year, the tournament covered all 5 races that were on TNT. We could do something like that since TNT had 6 summer races in 2009. However, I think the best method would be starting at the summer Daytona race. Since they started at a super speedway this year, I think we should start at a super speedway in 2009 for the potential first round chaos. So, for the 5 tournament races, that'll give us Daytona, Chicago, Indianapolis, Pocono, and Watkins Glen. Now, in order to get our bracket set up properly, let's take a look at the rules they used this year. The bracket seeding was determined by the 3 races prior to the start of the tournament, so we'll need to look at Michigan, Sonoma, and New Hampshire for 2009. Perfect. Now, who gets in the tournament? That'll be the top 32 drivers after the race prior to the seeding round, so we'll need to look at the point standings after the first Pocono race for 2009. And how are those 32 drivers seeded after those 3 races? Okay, so it's each driver's highest finishing position, then next highest finishing position for tiebreakers, and then point standings if they're still tied. Excellent. So I'll just have to run a few queries and we'll have our bracket for 2009. After crunching all the numbers, the top 32 drivers after the 14th race of the season at Pocono have been determined, with Paul Menard and Robbie Gordon being the only drivers having started all 14 races missing the tournament. At this point in the season, Tony Stewart led the points coming off his win at Pocono, and the last few drivers to get in, AJ Allmendinger, David Stremme, David Reagan, and Michael Waltrip. We'll see if they can upset any of the favorites later on. Alright, now that we know who's in it, let's check out the seeding. Mark Martin, Casey Kane, and Joey Logano, who had just picked up his first career win in underwhelming fashion, won the seeding races and took the top 3 seeds. Kane's second best finish, a 10th at New Hampshire, was better than Martin and Logano's second best finishes and gave him the tournament's top seed due to the tiebreaker rules mentioned earlier. I'll leave all these seedings here for a few seconds with the seeding race finishes, so you can pause if you really want to see the calculations. So now we can stuff these seeds into a bracket and take a look at some of the interesting first round matchups we'll see at Daytona. We've got top seed Casey Kane taking on David Stremme. We've got a Jimmy Johnson-Ryan Newman first round matchup and a rematch of the 2002 Rookie of the Year battle, and who are the 3rd and 4th place drivers in 2009 points. We've got former teammates Tony Stewart and Bobby Labonte going head to head. On the other side of the bracket, we've got second seeded Mark Martin with a tough matchup against Jeff Burton as the 31 seed. Burton was still 10th in points and had some rough seeding round races. You've got former teammates AJ Allmendinger and Brian Vickers. A Kurt Busch and Matt Kenseth matchup in the first round. Another tough one with Kurt 5th and Matt 8th in points. And Denny Hamlin versus Kevin Harvick would seem like another tough one, although Harvick had really struggled early in 2009. So, we're all set for Daytona. Let's take a look at how each of those first round matchups played out. One matchup was all but over after a lap 13 crash involving Mark Martin, who tried to get back in line in front of Matt Kenseth. The two made contact off turn 2, and Mark ended up in the inside backstretch wall. While he'd get back on track and complete 79 laps, Jeff Burton easily advanced, as he finished all 160 laps and finished 16th, compared to Mark's 38th. On lap 28, David Stremme got loose off turn 2 and got into Casey Mears, who spun and slid into the inside wall, losing many laps for repairs. Effectively, his matchup with Greg Biffle was over, as long as Biffle could finish without issues, which he did, finishing 18th to advance. Mears would finish back in 34th. A blown tire on lap 57 for Sam Hornish Jr. would cause him to lose 8 laps during the race. But his matchup with Clint Bowyer wasn't over yet. Another much larger crash on lap 77 would affect many other matchups, completely ending one and virtually ending a few others. The crash started when Kasey Kahne got into his opponent, David Stremme, on the backstretch. Both were damaged, but Stremme lost many laps repairing damage, and Kahne easily advanced, finishing 15th to Stremme's 35th. And while Bowyer was involved in the crash and eventually lost a lap, he still finished 29th, knocking out Hornish, who finished 32nd. Both drivers in another matchup were also involved, but only one could continue. Dale Jr.'s day ended with the crash, but David Reutimann was able to keep running, and despite just a 36th place finish, Reutimann would advance with Dale Jr. finishing 39th. The crash also affected both drivers in another matchup, as enough damage was done to Michael Waltrip's car that he spent many laps repairing damage. And while Jeff Gordon's car looked pretty bad, he was able to continue and actually finished on the lead lap. Gordon advanced by finishing 28th over Waltrip's 37th. The Marcus Ambrose-Reed Sorensen matchup also effectively ended from this crash, as Ambrose missed the crash, but Sorensen didn't. Like the Biffle-Mears matchup, it was really just seeing if Ambrose could complete the race, which he did, having a great run in 6th, while Sorensen finished back in 33rd. Before the halfway point of the race, we had 7 of the 16 first-round matchups either already decided, or the only drama being, could one driver finish the race? The next big incident to greatly affect the matchups came on the last lap. With Kyle Busch leading, he tried to block Tony Stewart multiple times off turn 4. The two made contact, which sent Busch hard into the wall, triggering a massive wreck that affected many of the finishing positions. Stewart went on to win the race, meaning he advanced over 21st place finisher Bobby Labonte. Jimmy Johnson would finish second, advancing over 20th place Ryan Newman. Denny Hamlin finished third, advancing over Kevin Harvick, who received some damage in the lap 77 crash and finished 26th. Carl Edwards finished fourth, advancing over David Ragan, who survived a spin with 39 laps to go and finished 13th. Now for some of the fun matchups. Matt Kenseth and Kurt Busch were side by side for 6th on the last lap when Kyle Busch's crash occurred, but coming to the line, Kenseth lifted and Kurt ran through wide open to finish 5th to Kenseth's 8th to move on. With Kyle Busch leading and Elliott Sadler fighting for 10th, you'd think that matchup was over. However, as Busch crashed, Sadler made it through, just sneaking by Busch right before the line. Sadler ended up 10th and Busch 14th, and Kyle got knocked out. Juan Pablo Montoya and Jamie McMurray were also close on the last lap. Although the crash didn't affect their running positions, Montoya finished 9th and McMurray 11th in a close matchup. Both Joey Logano and Martin Truex Jr. finished on the lead lap, with Logano advancing with a 19th place finish compared to Truex's 25th. And in our last first round matchup, Brian Vickers defeated AJ Allmendinger with a 7th place finish to AJ's 17th. Looking at the bracket after round 1, every higher seed on the left side of the bracket won. No upsets occurred. For as eventful as Daytona was, that's pretty surprising. On the right side of the bracket, we had 3 lower seeds win, with 31st seeded Jeff Burton beating 2nd seeded Mark Martin, being the biggest upset by far. Moving on to Chicagoland Speedway for round 2 of the tournament. And there was only one crash involving a tournament driver. With 41 laps to go, Paul Menard blew a tire after contact with Dale Earnhardt Jr., and Jeff Burton had nowhere to go as Scott Speed came out of nowhere and collected him, ending Burton's race back in 37th. Speed's teammate and pole sitter Brian Vickers advanced to the quarterfinals with a 7th place finish. At the time of the crash, Vickers was running 3rd and Burton 30th, so Burton was unlikely to advance without Vickers running into trouble anyway. Mark Martin dominated the race, leading 195 of the 267 laps, but the early crash at Daytona knocked him out of the tournament. However, the rest of the top 5 were all still in the tournament and all advanced. Jeff Gordon finished 2nd, defeating 10th place finisher Juan Pablo Montoya. Top-seeded Kasey Kahne finished 3rd, knocking out Clint Bowyer in his 9th place finish. Daytona winner Tony Stewart finished 4th, taking out 31st place finisher Greg Biffle, who was uncharacteristically off pace here. I didn't see where he had issues, he just ran 31st from what I could see. And Denny Hamlin finished 5th, advancing over 2010's Chicagoland winner David Rudiman, who finished 12th in 2009. The Jimmy Johnson-Marcus Ambrose matchup was probably a bit closer than you'd think at a track like Chicagoland, but Jimmy still advanced with an 8th place finish compared to Ambrose's 11th. The Kurt Busch-Carl Edwards matchup was fun in the closing stages. Kurt was ahead when he made contact with Jimmy Johnson, causing a tire rub, and he fell back a bit. After another late caution, both Kurt and Carl pitted, and Carl ended up 14th and Kurt 17th after a green-white checkered finish. And in the last matchup of round 2, third-seeded but underdog Joey Logano continued his run despite another mediocre finish, beating Elliott Sadler by finishing 18th to Sadler's 27th. With the quarterfinals next, we definitely did not get similar results to 2025's tournament. The only real underdog still left is Joey Logano. You could consider Brian Vickers an underdog too, but he had a surprisingly good year in 2009, which was the best of his career. For the quarterfinal matchups, we head to Indianapolis Motor Speedway. There was only one major issue involving any of the 8 remaining contenders, with Denny Hamlin having a transmission issue immediately after leaving pit road on a lap 33 stop. He'd lose 16 laps while repairs were made, which pretty much handed the win to eventual 12th place finisher Joey Logano, who continued his Cinderella run into the semifinals. After Juan Pablo Montoya dominated the race but dropped back after a pit road speeding penalty, Jimmy Johnson won his 3rd Brickyard 400 and advanced in the tournament, defeating 7th place finisher and top-seeded Casey Kane. Tony Stewart's 3rd place run was enough to knock out Jeff Gordon, who finished 9th in the highest profile matchup we've seen thus far in this tournament. And in the last quarterfinal matchup, Brian Vickers' 5th place finish moved him to the semifinals as he defeated Carl Edwards in his 15th place finish. Our semifinal matchups have been set, with one side of the bracket having a matchup between 2 drivers who at the time had 5 series championships between them, the 2 Chevys of Jimmy Johnson and Tony Stewart. And on the other side of the bracket, we have a matchup of 2 drivers who at the time had 2 career wins between them, the 2 Toyotas of Brian Vickers and Joey Logano. Pocono Raceway will host the semifinal matchups. Let's start with Vickers versus Logano, which was fairly uneventful. Logano ran mid-pack at best all day until getting involved in a late race crash, finishing 27th. Without the crash, he wasn't going to beat Vickers anyway. Vickers ran well all day and finished 6th to advance to the championship race. Tony Stewart was set to start on the pole due to being the points leader and qualifying being canceled. However, a practice crash forced him to a backup car and the rear of the field for the start of the race. He slowly made his way near the front, but didn't have as good a car as he did in June at Pocono, where he won his first race as an owner-driver. Jimmy Johnson would start second and run up front until just past lap 100, when he started experiencing some engine issues. He dropped 3 laps off the pace until the team was able to fix the issue. He made up all 3 laps, all by way of the lucky dog, and restarted 25th on the final restart with 13 laps to go. Within 4 laps, he was top 10 and right behind Stewart. However, he wasn't able to get to Tony and actually lost a few more positions in the final few laps, and Tony advanced by finishing 10th to Jimmy's 13th. So here we are with Tony Stewart versus Brian Vickers for the championship heading to Watkins Glen. Well, this wasn't much of a battle between the two, and that was pretty much expected. Tony was a 4-time Watkins Glen winner heading into the race, and Vickers had 1 career top 10 at a road course. And while Vickers was fairly competitive, finishing 11th, Tony worked his way forward and led 34 of the 90 laps, taking the checkered flag for his 5th Watkins Glen victory, and winning this made-up 2009 in-season tournament. Unfortunately for Tony, there was no trophy, no $1 million, and no money gun. There you go. Not exactly a huge upset for a 2009 in-season tournament, and unlike 2025, very few actual upsets throughout. But we did have some surprises get further than expected. While not the most useful or informational video, I actually had fun making this, and if you want to see more of these, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and check out the rest of my channel for more classic NASCAR content.